Okay, we should be live everywhere now. So, welcome everybody. I am HP Holo. I write stuff, and I also interview other authors who write stuff. And today I have Patrick Chiles of Escape Orbit on the show. You will notice that my husband Jacob is also here. He has nothing to do with this book, but he has read the first book in this series and really loved it. So he is here to provide fun conversation and color commentary. This one is a little bit different from some of the ones we've run recently, where viewers, you have a chance to win a signed copy of Escape Orbit. So what you can do is go to the event description. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, you'll see a little link you can click. Just put in all the information that link asks for, and that automatically enters you to win. I'm also going to put a little link in the chat to make it easier to find. If you're on Twitter, just find Facebook or YouTube, because Twitter doesn't communicate with my streaming service for some reason. Anyway, we are about to get going. So, Patrick, tell us about yourself. Where can we find your stuff? What do you write? All the fun author information.
So, well, you can find me where all fine books are sold. Of course, the Bain.com website, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, which I just found out from a friend of mine on Facebook. It's actually out there now at Books A Million. He picked up one down in Kentucky. Speaking for myself, yeah, I write hard science fiction. I like the near future stuff. Things that are set, say, in the next 10 or 20 years, kind of extrapolating today's technology out a little bit, where it might be, in the future, or things we could be doing now if we committed the resources to it. That's kind of the stuff that really lights me up. This is my third book with Bain. It's my fifth overall. My self-published, my first two. And then I've had a few short stories of Bain. I have a novella that's out as an ebook with them. And what else would you like to know?
Well, that's what the whole interview is for. So,
all right.
Very first question, very straightforward. What's Escape Orbit about?
So Escape Orbit picks up where my first Bain novel, Frozen Orbit, left off. It is about a NASA astronaut named Jack Templeton, who is out at the far end of the solar system, and his only companion is an onboard artificial intelligence named Daisy. And how he got out there, again, it picks up from the end of Frozen Orbit, where he had to use their spacecraft as a slingshot to return an injured crew member to Earth fast enough for her to get medical care that she needed to save her life. But what that involved was he ended up in a kind of a long slingshot around the sun and headed back out towards the edge of the solar system. And there was really no avoiding that, because science. And I promise I go into a little more detail than that in the books. And but he's got a goal in mind, since he drew the short straw. He's going to be doing this no matter what. He is looking for what is theorized or called Planet 9. And I don't know if y'all are familiar with that theory or not. So the Planet 9 theory, this is a real theory. And I should say, none of the stuff that I write about is stuff that I made up from whole cloth.
Which is, if I can just segue a little bit, one of the things that I really appreciated about Frozen Orbit, which I've got my copy of right here, the hard science is it's real gritty. It has a feel of authenticity to it, and actually, when you bring up the injured crew member, not only did I find like the orbital dynamics, the ship maneuvers and whatnot to have a feel of authenticity all throughout the book, but also the medical situation, because you're dealing with astronauts in deep space for long periods, both under acceleration and in zero or low acceleration situations, and that has a factor in the ending of Frozen Orbit, where it's like, oh, we're in zero G, we don't have a problem here, and then we're under acceleration, and suddenly there's a medical problem again. And I found that aspect of it, I mean, basically all of the science that you put into the book very interesting, but I also, that one caught me by surprise, because I was expecting, the spaceships and the orbital stuff and how we get from point A to point B, but you cut me off guard there, Patrick.
Well, I'm glad that I did. I appreciate that.
And I have questions about the science later.
Okay, well, I should get to again what's going on here with escape orbit. So the whole Planet 9 thing is astronomers have theorized, and of course there's competing theories here, but that they've seen evidence for a pretty large planet, like size of Neptune, maybe larger, way out at the edge of the solar system. I mean, barely constitutes still being in our solar system, but it's enough to be in orbit around the sun. So there you go. And the evidence for this is that there are enough dwarf planets like Pluto size, maybe smaller, think like large asteroids, that far out, whose orbits have been what they perturbed or drawn out in a certain direction, and all of them kind of in the same general direction. So it's all kind of pointing to some large object that over time, I mean, billions of years, have been pulling those orbits out there. And they've seen enough of that to get a pretty good idea of its orbital period and thus its mass. And they think they have a pretty good idea of where it might be right now. But even at that, even if they knew the right spot of sky to look in, this would be so far away that it's going to be really hard to image. But anyway, he's out looking for this. They're counting on stumbling across its gravity well to bend their orbit enough to keep them from just zipping out of the solar system forever. And he's had to go into hibernation on top of it. So his AI, Daisy, is really controlling the ship. But I don't want to get into too much because it's kind of fun how Jack gets brought back into the picture, and it's in an unexpected way. But the other unexpected thing is they get to where they believe Planet 9 is supposed to be, and it's impossible to escape that they have found. And I just dropped a big pun there, but it's impossible to escape the reality that they've encountered something with a lot of gravity, but it's not a planet. There's some, and what led me to go down that road when I was crafting this story a couple of years ago was alternate theories of what this Planet 9 thing might be. And one of them is a primordial black hole, which wouldn't be real big. It wouldn't even be from a collapsed star like you traditionally think of a black hole, but primordial meaning it's left over from the birth of the birth of the universe rather. And but it couldn't be that either because it needs to be something the characters can survive. And so, yeah, so that led me down. There were a lot of rabbit holes writing this book, but the one that I stuck with is wormhole theory. And so I had a lot of research to do with that. And anyway, I'm happy to talk about that later. I'm sure you're going to have more questions.
Oh, certainly. Now, I did want to ask, I have just started reading Escape Orbit and am finding it easy to follow. But I did want to ask, can these two be read out of order, or do you recommend that they be read sequentially?
Well, I always recommend people buy more of my books. So, no, it can be read out of order. In fact, that was something that when I got the editorial notes back that they were happy with, that a reader could pick this up without having read Frozen Orbit and be able to follow the story, that I wove the backstory in enough without beating you over the head with it.
It does flow really easily.
Yeah, yeah, and that was something I worked really hard at. And the review that came out in Publishers Weekly not too long ago said the same thing. So I was really, really gratified to see that. That first review is always a nail biter, especially if it's coming from an outlet like that, because
Oh, yes.
I looked through a lot of their other reviews and they weren't super kind. Some of them, and so I was really, again, really gratified to see that they thought highly of this, and that also, again, that they thought readers could pick it up without having read Frozen Orbit.
Nice. Yeah, it's always good when you get a good review from one of the sometimes scary outlets. It's so gratifying.
Yeah,
Now, in
yeah.
terms of the sciences, now, as far as I know, your background is not in space sciences, right? What is your background?
My background is as an English major in college,
Oh, so that's
and
the
I
opposite
have
end.
been
which I
working.
totally did not expect after reading Frozen Orbit. In fact, after I finished the first book in this series, I was working on a hard sci-fi manuscript of my own, and I'm like, maybe I should like poke Patrick and ask him to review my science here and check that. And then when we had a chance to talk last week, it's like, wait, you're not like a scientist?
Guilty as charged.
Yes, I've
Yeah.
heard.
So, no, I'm not a scientist, but I play one on the keyboard.
So what's your research process? Like, what do you do to
It,
enable you to write so well in this genre that makes people think you have a professional background in these
it
sciences?
takes a lot. It takes a lot, y'all. So golly, well, I guess I'll start all the way at the beginning. So, well, you guys live in South Carolina, you know the Citadel, go Dogs. I'm going to
Yep.
give my alma mater a shout out, but they are a classical liberal arts college. So there's a core curriculum, and I don't know how much things have changed over the years, but when I was a cadet back in the 80s, um, everybody had to take a certain amount of language, of history, of English lit, of math, of science. So I had to have some kind of fundamental background of that. Now, how well I retained it is a whole other matter. But my career was in aviation, and specifically flight operations management, later in safety management programs. And so that's inherently got a lot of technical aspects to it. And so I picked up a lot along the way. And I had always had this fascination with astronomy, with the 60 space program. And so a lot of the background research that went into my writing is stuff I'd been doing over the last 30 years, just reading and trying to absorb as much of this as I could. And then along the way in my aviation career, I stumbled into, I like to joke, I Forrest Gumped my way into an engineering job. Um, it is a little slice of aeronautical engineering called aircraft performance. People in the industry would know what I'm talking about, but I found it fascinating. I was delighted to have landed this job, and it was based on my prior work experience. And they took a lot of time to send me to school to learn what I needed to. It wasn't enough to get an engineering degree by a long shot, but it was at least enough to speak the language. And this was all about the time I was starting to write. And so and again, it's the near future stuff that really appeals to me. And I think maybe it's kind of a Walter Mitty kind of existence. Like I wish this is the way the world was. I'm writing about the things that I would love to see happening now or be involved with right now. And so that's what prompts me to write what I write. And so I'm taking what I know from my background and layering that over all this weird space flight stuff. Um, it, it, again, there's enough similarities between those two worlds that I felt like I could do a lot of writing based on my own experience with the personality types and the running missions and crisis management and things like that. And then the push pull with the government. I mean, in aviation, we have to deal with the feds a lot. So, and I like to use NASA as a foil. It's maybe not always fair, but, it works for dramatic purposes. Sometimes when I read about current events in spaceflight, I think, man, it's not really for dramatic purposes. I have been told by a couple of NASA insiders that I get some of the politics right too. So, and I was just kind of guessing at that.
Oh, nice. Now, you also went into the Marines, right?
I did.
Yes. So does your military experience necessarily affect your writing these days?
Oh, yeah. It absolutely does.
In what way?
So, it's not always a direct thing, but it depends on which books we're talking about. So the ones I've been writing for Baen, they all occur in the same universe, but they're following two different tracks. So Frozen Orbit and Escape Orbit, or we're calling them the Eccentric Orbits series, are kind of the big idea sci-fi track. And the other book I wrote for Baen, Frontier, is more of the action adventure military sci-fi techno thriller kind of track, and that's where more of my military experience comes into play. The experiences of what it's like to be in an organization where 110% of you is demanded. Other people's lives can depend on how competent you are at your job, how dedicated you are to it. Your own sense of responsibility and duty. And then some of the little things like being the new guy in a military organization in a new unit, the new guy in a unit, surrounded by more experienced types and that fish out of water feeling. And you've got to find a way to fit in and be the fish that belongs in that water. And everybody's watching you to see if you rise to it or fall flat on your face. So, and of course the ins and outs, the jargon, the way service members deal with each other. If I wanted to be really realistic, I'm trying to not write that kind of language. So I kind of step up to the line, but not too far over it. I like to keep things PG-13-ish.
Right. So would you say that your books are safe to be read by young adults in that respect?
Yeah.
Okay,
I would. There's
they're not written for young adults, but still approachable.
Yeah, when you think about some of the stuff that passes for young adult entertainment these days, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, forgot to say too, for viewers, if you have any questions for Patrick, just put them in the comments and I will get to them when we have a little break. All right, so my next question. Now, obviously, Escape Orbit is a mysterious thing in space story, and mysterious thing in space stories are some of my favorites. And it's like everything from something as silly as the black hole to something like 2010, the year we make contact. Like I love them all. So I'm curious, did any stories of that particular nature inspire this this novel? And if so, which ones? Or was it more of a general interest in the Planet Nine?
It was kind of a general interest. I mean, the one movie that I think you could draw the closest comparison to is Interstellar.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons, but I've been joking it's Interstellar without all the crying.
That is a great description. I love it.
So, but that comparison, or excuse me, taking that path wasn't really intentional. I don't set out to intentionally copy anything. But there's no avoiding some of the similarities. One thing that was inspirational in a kind of indirect way was 2010, because Arthur C. Clarke didn't set out to write a series out of 2001. He thought it was going to be a standalone novel, and people we're asking them, well, what happens next? What really happened to Dave Bowman? Well, what started escape orbit was my sister-in-law asked me, what happened to Jack Templeton? You left it wide open at the end of the story. I want to know, where did he go? Where did he find? And I had only tangentially thought of that. Everything I write, I like to leave open-ended enough that there could be sequels if they do well enough, and if the publisher wants them, or if I can convince them to let me write them. And and that was the case here, although I really thought I had just a standalone book. So she got me to thinking about where this might go. My wife had brought up the same thing, that, yeah, you could do a lot more with this. So that took a while to figure out. And it was when I started reading about the alternate theories of what this Planet 9 gravity well might be. And that's really kind of what clinched it for me. I thought, yeah, I can do a lot of weird science stuff with this and have a lot of fun with this story.
It's interesting that you mentioned 2010, because one of the first things that I did after I finished reading Frozen Orbit was pop in the old DVD of 2010 and rewatch that movie. Because it just, it put me in the mood for more, entertainment like that. And, that's.
It wasn't just 2010 either. We watched like a whole string of space physics movies for like a week after that.
Well, we started with 2010.
Well, yeah, we started with 2010. But
yeah, I really found that Frozen Orbit scratched that good hard sci-fi itch for me.
Good. I'm really glad, man. I'm really glad to hear that. That's the kind of thing I want to inspire in readers, and for another writer to pick that up. I really do appreciate it, because I know how it is now being a writer and reading other people's stuff. My own writer brain gets in the way.
Oh yeah.
It's like, yeah, I wouldn't use that word, and I wouldn't have phrased that way. And why did he leave that sentence in there? And it's maddening. So
yeah, for audience members who don't know what we're talking about, basically as authors, we have this inner editor, and when we're reading books, we have a lot of trouble turning that editor off. We're like reading, it's like, oh, I would restructure this, why is this contraction here? That's going to be different.
Yeah.
That is the primary reason why whenever I sit down to read for fun, I always have a mojito or some equivalent drink, because if I have alcohol in me, I'm not going to be analytical, and therefore I can rest while I read.
She's not joking either.
Oh yeah.
Well, that sounds like I need to.
Oh yeah, you have the right idea.
Been staring at this glass of Blanton's for the last 23 minutes and 20 seconds.
You have a more interesting drink than me. I have Mio water with little baby Yodas on it. So bourbon sounds much more fun.
It's a launch party. I'm celebrating.
Yes.
Yeah.
Rightfully so.
All right, next question. Now, I have seen your writing described as ordinary people doing extraordinary things, which is another favorite story type that I like. And you've already spoken a little bit about this, but if you had anything else to add, what leads you to gravitate toward that theme in particular?
Again, it's the desire to put the reader into the story in a way they feel like, okay, this could be happening right now, or I can see myself doing this. Every book is escapist to some degree, and mine is like, I don't think of mine as escapist, because when I use that word, I think of fantasy and really far-flung sci-fi, but it is, I guess, in a sense, just in a different kind of way. Back to my prior career, it was taking that world that I knew really well and layering it into what I wanted to see commercial private space flight become. And this went all the way back to when I first started writing. It was like 2004. So this was around the time of Spaceship One flying, and Richard Branson launching Virgin Galactic. Now that business venture hasn't turned out to go the way that he hoped it would, and a lot of people wanted it to. But that still was an inspiration to me at the time, because they were saying they eventually wanted to do not just, suborbital up and down joy rides, but point to point, like hypersonic through space. So you think getting from LA to Sydney in 90 minutes or something like that. And I thought, okay, if they do that, number one, I wanted to see it happen for my own career interest, because I want to be involved with that program. But also I thought, okay, the writing bug had been at me for a long time. I just had to find the story to tell to start, and that was it. As I put on my work hat and my writing hat and said, okay, what's the worst thing that could happen, and how would that look, and how would they deal with it? And I did all that based on, again, the world I already knew. And I thought, okay, I can layer this in, because if they ever do what they say they want to do, it's going to look a lot like the world I was already very familiar with. The specifics might be different, but the fundamentals of what they were doing, again, would be very similar. And I thought there was some great mileage to get out of that story-wise. And so I took, again, I got to know the personality types a lot. And one of the pilots I served with in the Marines went on to be an astronaut. So, I felt like I could use all that. Like I haven't really modeled any characters off any specific individuals. It's just taking bits and pieces of people that I've known and worked with over the years, and using that to craft interesting characters. And I look at like I looked at some of the things that we did in the business when I was in, and some of it was pretty amazing. And it's kind of the behind the scene things that the public never hears about. And it's like, we're just people, we get together on the weekends to grill burgers, or, go out and do stuff together, or hang out. And, we're nothing special. We're just good at our jobs, and try to do the best we can. And so I thought that would make the stories more approachable to people too.
Right. All right. Next question. Who are some authors in general who have inspired your work?
I'd say the biggest one, and this might surprise people who aren't familiar with my work, but Tom Clancy.
I can
see
that
though.
Yeah. I was a real sucker for 80s Cold War techno thrillers. I was a little sad when the Soviet Union fell, because it's like, crap, what's he going to do for material now?
Well, you've got the is it the Archangel?
Yes.
In the first book, which is this Cold War Russian Soviet spaceship with an Orion drive, which, if people aren't familiar with what that is, they're basically chucking nuclear warheads out the back and detonating them and being pushed around by the explosion.
Das Vidania. There should be vodka to toast them.
And if I recall correctly, one of your characters says something to the effect of, only the Soviets would be that crazy.
Yeah. Yep. And that was the theory behind it. And I love that story. What was the original question now?
The original question was what authors inspired your work in general, and then we also have 2 audience questions after that.
Okay, because I definitely want to get to that, and I definitely want to get to how I came up with that crazy freaking spacecraft in frozen orbit. So yeah, Tom Clancy was a big one, and people can quibble with character depth with him, and the massive, David Weber-sized info dumps. Clancy did it first, right? But I love that stuff. And, Hunt for Red October is one of my favorite books. And I still think it's his best one. I found a hard copy first edition of it back at Half Price Books a few years ago for like $7, and I couldn't believe I got that kind of deal. But when I started writing, that was the style I wanted to write in. And because I was writing near future stuff and, my military background, it never really left me, once a Marine, always a Marine. I thought if Clancy had written sci-fi, what might that look like? Because that's what I'm going to do. And so that is the style and kind of tempo that I shoot for. Some other writers that have influenced me, you'd be surprised, not many sci-fi. I'm not as well read in the genre as a lot of other writers are. Most of my reading is nonfiction, and again, it's not intentionally doing book research, but it's just a natural extension of the things that I'm really interested in. So, I'm looking at my bookshelf now. Yeah, maybe more sci-fi than I thought, just not traditional. Michael Crichton was another big influencer. I loved the same kind of stories, the near future. What could we be doing right now, or almost ready to do? Think like Jurassic Park, right? You feel like you're in the story. I mean, we might be 50 years, if ever, from that kind of technology, but he made it feel like we could be doing it right now if somebody wanted to throw that kind of money at it. And yeah, again, sorry, I'm looking at the bookshelf, and I'd say that those are the big two.
Cool. All right, we have a few comments and questions from readers. So the first will be from Leona, who says, "So please tell me you're going to write the third book. Is there a third book in the works, or?"
Okay, great story. So I mentioned that I was led down a lot of rabbit trails with this book, and it took me longer to complete than I thought it would. And thank you, Tony, for being flexible with my deadline. But I had probably 20 or 30,000 words worth of content that did not make it into this book. It just didn't fit, distracted from the crux of the story. So that had been sitting in a holding pen file. I create one for every book I write. And I was approached by Bain to write a short story for the website to help publicize this launch. And I thought, oh, yeah, no problem. That'll be easy because I've got all of these pages of stuff that I wrote. I'm sure I can draw a short story out of that. So I get them all together. I kind of organize them in a sequence that made sense. And once I read through it, I realized, no, you've actually got the opening chapters for the next book. So I had to drop back and punt and create a whole different short story out of thin air that I did from Daisy's point of view. So yeah, there will be another one. I can't tell you when. I still have to figure out where that story is going to go. I have a pretty good idea. I'm in the middle of another one right now that I'm working on. It's part of a 2-book deal with Bain. That's a real departure for me. It is more far-flung, fun sci-fi with aliens and stuff like that. But no, I definitely want to get back to this because what I found when I strung all these random scenes together was a pretty strong opening.
Nice. Having too much content, though, is an excellent problem to have for a short story, especially when it results in another novel. All right, next question we have is from Cece, who says, is it difficult to accurately write time and distance scale in space, or does that come pretty naturally to you?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, it can be difficult because, especially when you start talking about localized time references, and that was a thing in escape orbit, because I don't want to give too much away. In fact, I need to be really careful here. It's a major plot point in the book, but it can be really hard to keep that stuff straight. You have to really think things through. Read, not just write it out in an outline of how things are going to work, but what sequence they need to happen in, and when this event happens to character A in his localized time, what's going on with character B in their localized time, and the distances too, because I'm writing about journeys that take years, and how do you do that in a way that keeps the reader engaged? You can't get bogged down in the day-to-day of life on a spaceship on a 2 or 3 year mission, unless you need help getting to sleep at night. So you learn to be concise. You learn to get the major plot points out in a way that makes sense, and then it makes sense for the time leaps that you inevitably have to write in there. So
yeah, I can definitely relate to the time distance mechanics coming up and biting you in the writing process unexpectedly, because a lot of times, I tend to, when possible, not lean into like faster than light communication. And I remember this, I was working on this one manuscript, and I had a scene where 2 characters were talking, and then I'm like, oh wait, they are 3 light minutes apart right now. This is not going to go according to plan. I am going to have to modify the plan.
Yeah.
I actually have just a nice comment for you from Kurt, who says he picked up a copy of Frontier at Deep South Con last October and thought it was great. So looking forward to more. Now, Frontier's a standalone, right?
What's that?
Frontier a standalone? Am I right?
It is, like I mentioned, it's the beginning of the military sci-fi adventure techno thriller track. Again, there's some character crossover. One of the main character from Frontier shows up for a couple of scenes in Escape Orbit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I had a lot of fun writing that, and I'm planning for more in that too. And
nice.
I am thinking of ways to weave these 2 different story arcs together into some really big slam bang. I don't want to say finish, but something that people aren't going to be able to put down. Like I like to think like Red Storm Rising in space.
Ooh,
nice.
That sounds awesome. All right, we actually have another viewer question, and it's from Joelle. Hey, Joelle. This one is a fun one. It's a little long, but I think here we go. All right. So, question: if you had, it's obscuring.
Oh, I see it. Yeah.
If you had a Hollywood agent tell you that 2 companies wanted to Escape Orbit into a movie, so situation is Studio A will closely follow the heart of the story and hire excellent actors, but the special effects will suck. Studio B will do so-so. I've got to unhide it I've got to hide it for a second so I can read the rest. Studio B will do so-so with the story, and the acting will be flat, but the science will be spot on, and the special effects will be Oscar level. Both are going to pay you millions, but which studio do you let option Escape Orbit?
Dang it, Joel. What the heck kind of question is that? Oh my gosh. Yeah, you take the bag of money and you close your eyes and you move to New Zealand and you just don't pay attention anymore.
Hey, that sounds like a good plan to me.
That's my retirement plan. That or hitting the lottery. I think
we can tell you're a fellow author by the size of your question.
We need to define the level of suckage. Okay. All right. Because the worst special effects today by some, college kids in their dorm room on their MacBook are better than anything that you could have found 20, 30 years ago. And now, unless we're talking like, 50s Godzilla movie level special effects. Okay. Yeah. No, I'm thinking option A.
That was actually a shorter answer than I expected. But yeah, I
could
did.
probably go longer, but
Oh, we do have another question actually, and this one is from Anna, who says, "What is the hardest part of writing near future sci-fi for you?" And you said you mostly read nonfiction. Does that include excuse me, I can't talk tonight. Journal articles, or are they usually books?
It does include some journal articles. Because when I really want to get in the nitty gritty of understanding something, like for Escape Orbit, one of our other Bain writers, Les Johnson, is a NASA research scientist. He put me in touch with a physics professor at Baylor who is studying wormholes, and specifically the possibility of traversable wormholes that don't collapse as soon as something tries to go down the hole. So he sent me a lot of information, answered a lot of questions, sent me a paper that he had written with some of his graduate students, and even bounced some of my ideas off of them to help me figure out what would be feasible enough to write about, and hopefully keep the science correct. I'm hoping I did right by him and his students. So mainly books. I start with that, and then if I need to dig into more detail, then I'll start looking up professional journals and the like.
What nonfiction books in particular? Do you have any particular standouts that really helped you through this novel or conceptualize this novel?
Not this one in particular. No, no. A lot of the stuff that I started with background are a lot of nonfiction histories of the space program. There was one, I think it was Apollo Race to the Moon, and it was about all of the engineering hurdles that had to be overcome to make that program work. Another one is Andrew Chaikin's Man on the Moon, which is more of the people side of the program. And that's the one that was the basis for HBO's From the Earth to the Moon series back 20 some years ago, that Tom Hanks made. Now, those are both excellent books. I'm looking at some others. Gene Kranz's book, Failure is Not an Option. That's a really good, inside story of what it's like to be running mission control. Another really good one was his boss, Chris Kraft. It's maybe less well known. Kranz became pretty popular with the Apollo 13 movie. But Kraft is the one who really founded mission control and drove how it was going to work, and had to run up against some really strong personalities with the Mercury astronauts. You know, Pilots have pretty strong personalities anyway. Fighter pilots more so. Test pilots really more so. The 7 that got to be selected to be the first astronauts were gods before they even set foot in a capsule, right? But he had to have an equally strong personality to run things from the ground. And he took his experience in running flight test programs to do that. I learned a lot from that, and that's where I also learned how I could maybe take some of my own experience and layer that over this world. And it enabled me to understand what they were doing. I might not completely understand all the technicalities behind it, but I sure as heck knew what it felt like, because the job I had in the airline world was a lot like that. Again, not as seat of your pants technical, but high pressure decision making that's time critical with incomplete information. And so that helped me describe it a lot. But his was really interesting to read, because after I had read so many of these other books that were focused on the astronauts, some of them they're autobiographies, and I would read his accounts of the same incidents, and I won't get into details, but from his perspective, I thought, I've been there before. I know exactly what this guy's talking about. Some people's egos are running away with them. And anyway, it's really roundabout, I know, but it showed that the people flying the vehicles are not necessarily the ones that need to be running the program for some very good reasons.
Interesting. All right. We are getting down to the last 15 minutes. So, to our viewers, I again wanted to say don't forget, you have a chance to win a signed copy of Escape Orbit if you would like. And the link is again in the event description if you're on YouTube and Facebook. And I'm going to again put it in the chat so it's easy to find and access. But I do have a final question. And now you were self-published at first, right? And
Yes.
then, as I understand it, Bain picked up your first 2 books. And I'm curious, how did that happen?
You know what? Yeah, no, I love this story. It was really fortunate turn of events, a real blessing to be honest. So yeah, when I wrote my first book, Perigee, it took a long time to write. I was figuring it out as I went along. I'd done some magazine writing in aviation industry magazines along the way. So learned a little bit about writing and dealing or working with editors. I almost said dealing with editors. That's not fair, Tony. Sorry. But seriously, no, I learned a lot about that, and I compared going from that to writing a novel as building model cars and then building a real car. But once I'd gotten through it and finished it, and I was satisfied with it, I started pitching it to agents and went through the usual couple of years of query, rejection, repeat, revise, repeat, and all that. And it's just soul crushing. And after a couple of years of that, honestly, I was ready to just give up. It's too much like high school dating, to be real honest. Do they like me? Did I say something wrong? What can I do to make them like me? And and this was about the time that self-publishing was becoming a lot more respectable. Up until about 2011, honestly, it was career suicide. That changed a lot with Amazon and Kindle direct publishing. And so I self-published my first 2 books. A newspaper writer down in Texas was reviewing my second book, Far Side. And he was a former NASA guy himself. And he wrote me and said he really, really enjoyed it. And would I mind if he sent a copy to Tony Weisskopf? And yes, you do not say no to that.
Yeah.
And at the time, Bain was really the only publisher I wanted to work with. But what was holding me back was, they took unagented submissions, but they said it could take a year and a half to get through the slush pile before you hear anything from us. So during that time, your work is locked up. You can't just go throw it out for sale on Amazon once you've done that. And so that was holding me back. So I was delighted to have somebody, basically get me, to the head of the line. I still had to go through the slush process, but, it's kind of like getting the e-ticket at Disney, right?
Yeah.
You get to go around the line. And a few months later, I got an email. I was at an industry conference and trying not to fall asleep. And so I'm going through, and this was BlackBerry days. I get this email on my BlackBerry from somebody whose name I didn't recognize. Well, it was Chris Rauchio. And, yeah. And so I didn't recognize the name, but I saw @Bain.com and went, and they said,
very awake.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I woke up then. And they offered to pick up those 2 books and republish them as ebooks through their site and worldwide distribution. And then they asked the question you really want to hear: what else have you got?
Mm-hmm.
And I was working on Frozen Orbit at the time. It took a while to get the story complete in my head, because it had started with back in 2015. So this was the New Horizons probe was going to be getting our first close-up look at Pluto. I was really fascinated by that because we had never had a good look at it. It was so far out. And I thought this is going to be really, they're going to see some probably really strange stuff. How strange could it get? What could they find that they didn't expect to find? And because I don't write until now, I don't write space alien fiction, or didn't. Okay, it couldn't be as obvious as an alien spacecraft. And, even if I did write that kind of fiction, that would have just been too obvious.
Mm-hmm.
So it took a while to figure out what it might be. And I realized an old Soviet era spacecraft is out there, and not just not a probe, but a manned spacecraft.
Mm-hmm.
Which is such a great way to start the mystery
It
behind
really is.
Frozen
Yeah.
Orbit and the impetus to get our have the Americans fly out there. It's like, what is this ship
Yeah.
doing there?
Oh yeah, well, and I got to use the greatest line of all time in it when they're going through all this 40-year-old imagery, when they realize that this thing is out there, trying to find it and isolate it, and they get their first look at it, and one of them says, "That's no moon, that's a space station." Like, mic drop. Yeah, no, I love being able to use it. I stumbled into it. I was like, what does he say? Oh yeah, that's what he says. That's perfect.
Saw your chance and took it.
Yeah. And anyway, it did take me a long time to figure out that was the thing that was going to spark the beginning of the story. But that really was technology that they could have built it in the 80s if they really wanted to do it. And again, who else would have been nuts enough to do that and keep it secret, right? I mean, our Air Force was studying this back in the 60s and 70s. And so I just kind of made that leap that, well, they stole all kind of other technology from us. They might as well, and this was around the time of the START II treaty. So they had to make about 5,000 tactical nukes disappear. And here you go.
Yep.
That's how they did it.
Got another question for you, actually. How would you say your writing process has changed over the years, especially between your self-published days versus your traditionally published days? Has it changed all that much? Or
yeah, it has, because I went sort of full time about 4 years ago. I still have a job with an aviation safety consulting firm. I'm able to split my time pretty easily between, not easily, evenly between that and writing. And that's been a real blessing too. My boss is actually a big sci-fi fan, a big Bane fan, and he knows what I'm doing and the balance I've got to strike in life, and he's been enormously supportive. So, but yeah, before it was getting up at 4:35 in the morning before Melissa and the kids were having to get up and around for the day, squeezing it in at night if I had the energy left, taking my Sunday afternoons and doing that. And it was taking me almost 3 years to finish a book that way. And over that amount of time, it's really easy to lose the thread of the story and lose your enthusiasm for it. So I did learn the value of persistence for that and writing through it, even when you've lost your enthusiasm. Because when the idea first clicks, right, you got about a 6-month window where, it's your new baby, it's your favorite toy, and you want to play with it. If you go beyond, if you take much longer beyond that, it can be harder. So, but now it's just part of my life. I write in the mornings and shift gears late morning, lunchtime, to work on the consulting job.
Mhm.
So I'm able to get more work out consistently that way. And my goal with doing this was, if I'm going to be able to have any success at this, I needed to pick up the pace. I needed to get something out at least every year,
Right.
and this is how I do it. It takes me longer to write than I think a lot of other people, because the research takes me longer without having that technical background, and I won't commit to building a story around these concepts until I understand them. I'm satisfied I understand them enough to write about them coherently.
And that commitment, it comes out on the page.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, even with the very little bit that I've read already, I can already see it. So you
Well, I
definitely
really appreciate that, guys.
All right. Well, we are down to the end. And so thank you, everybody who's been watching. And of course, thank you, Patrick, for coming on. But before we go, I'm just going to have you again say where everyone can find your stuff. If you've got any conventions or signings or anything coming up, let us know that too.
Okay. All right. Well, my website is chilesfiles.com. There's Amazon links for the books there. Of course, you can get them through Amazon, get them through Bain.com, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, your local bookstores. I would ask people to, if you're interested in reading them, go to your local bookstore and ask them to stock it, because as we all know, the big national chains I will not name, have changed their buying model. And so it's that much more challenging for mid-listers to get our titles on the shelves. If you're already a bestseller, you're golden. The rest of us, it's...
we got to fight for those numbers.
You got to fight for your right to party. And so, did I cover everything with that?
I think so.
Social media, Facebook, Twitter.
Oh, yeah.
Patrick Chiles. I keep it simple. No fancy names or anything like that.
All right. Well, again, everybody, Escape Orbit comes out next week, or if you're at some lucky bookstores, it's out now. But pre-order it or go buy it. Yeah. And again, thank you everyone for watching, and thank you, Patrick, for joining us.
Thank you. I really appreciate you guys doing this, and your audience. I appreciate your questions, and I hope everybody picks up a copy and you enjoy it. And if you do, please consider leaving a review on Amazon or wherever you bought it. Reviews are good. We like reviews. So yes, we do. We hit that magic 50 number and it becomes a self-licking ice cream cone.
I've never heard that phrase before, and I'm going to use it every day now. I love it. All right. Again, thanks everyone for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.